Alright, now onto the defensive segment of my maneuvers series. The first maneuver that I'm going to be showing you is the break. It's the simplest of all defensive maneuvers, and it's also one of the most important. Now, the basic point you want to take away from this maneuver is that you want to give the opponent the most awkward firing angle possible, or none at all. And you do this by turning toward your opponent, and this is what I mean when I say turning into them. And one thing you don't want to do is you do not want to point directly at them, but you want to turn in their general direction. Alright, Bohika's diving on me. It was 109, and I turned directly toward him. And he cannot pull a shot with that kind of angle, so he has to go back up and readjust his firing angle. The next maneuver is called a split S, and this maneuver is used primarily as a defensive maneuver in the same manner as the break turn. And when I say that, I basically just mean you're essentially doing the same thing by bringing your plane towards his in order to give him a bad firing angle and make him go up for another pass. This maneuver can also be used as an offensive maneuver, but it's usually just referred to as a low yo-yo whenever it is. But when the maneuver is used defensively or aerobatically, it's called a split S. And the way you perform a split S is you roll your plane inverted by doing a half roll, and then you perform a half loop. So it basically looks like the opposite of an Immelmann turn. Alright, the next maneuver I have for you is the high G barrel roll. And what this maneuver is useful for, besides making you nostalgic for some Star Fox 64, is making the enemy overshoot. And what I mean by an overshoot is that the enemy is simply going to fly right past you because they're at a higher energy state than you, and they have the option to either perform a loop or a high yo-yo, or he could just go straight or dive until he gets enough separation to zoom climb away from the opponent that he was actually attacking, which is probably the best option if you do overshoot someone and end up in front of their gun sights, because you don't want to just zoom climb straight up in front of them, or else they can zoom climb with you, and they more than likely will have a short opportunity to actually kill you if you do that. Also, when doing a barrel roll, if the enemy is at a very high energy state, much higher than you, don't be afraid to use some throttle cuts in order to get him to overshoot more reliably. Also, make sure to use elevator, or else it's just an aileron roll and it's not as effective. The next tactic I'm going to show you is Guns D, and you may have heard it referred to at times as jinking. They're all referring to the same thing, and basically all it is just remaining evasive and using all three dimensions in order to make yourself a more difficult target to hit. And it can be pretty effective, at least for temporarily delaying a gun solution from your opponent. This maneuver is called a flat scissors, and what that basically is a weaving flight path across the sky. And the weaving flight path is a pretty good description of this maneuver. You just have to take a few things into account, like the lead reversals. You can see here I'm trying to get my turn back towards the attacker before he can turn back towards me. And I eventually get him to overshoot, and he's directly in front of my guns. And now here is just another example. We start out about even. I get my lead turn before him. However, the Typhoon actually responds better at high speeds than the Yak 3. So he's actually turning a bit better than me. And that's another thing to take into account. The plane that is slower and the plane that maneuvers better overall is the one with the advantage in a flat scissors. So while the Yak 3 turns a little bit better at low speeds, it's still not going to win at high speeds, and I have a little bit of difficulty getting behind him here. And it actually could have been beneficial if I used a few throttle cuts, but I do end up eventually getting behind him and taking him out. And the last maneuver that I'm going to show you is the rolling scissors, and the rolling scissors is basically a corkscrew flight path across the sky that involves the defender forcing an overshoot against a diving attacker by pulling up and into his dive. You can see that I'm trying to keep my lift vector facing the P-47, and basically you just keep using vertical maneuvers until one of you either runs out of energy or loses sight of each other. And the one with the advantage in a rolling scissors is actually the one probably with a lighter airframe that's better in vertical maneuvers. So you can see that's a pretty good evasive tactic to use against the P-47 and an LA-5, because there's no way I'm losing an extended rolling scissors fight against such a heavy opponent. And you can clearly see the P-47 starting to run dangerously dry on energy. And then after this vertical maneuver, I get on his 6 and pull around for the shot. Although missing because my aim is awful. But anyway, that should be it for this episode. I will see you in my next one.